All right, so today we're going to be talking about punctuation. In particular, it's something called soft punctuation. Let's first, to get started, take a look at what punctuation looks like in our dictionaries. I'm doing a quick search for squiggly brackets with a period. There are many examples to show that this is the proper syntax for having a period. You would never want to have your final FPLT be simply defined as a period all by itself. The special syntax for the period, with the use of the squiggly brackets, shows that it is going to make that period work appropriately with the words around it. For example, it's going to place a period after the last word, removing any space before it, and then including 2 extra spaces before starting a capitalized next word. Now you wouldn't get that if you just had a period all by itself. The same logic applies to the normal comma syntax. Okay, syntax how it looks here. Now the reason that I wanted to show you this is because I certainly hope if you ever have any other instances where you want a line, let's say it's your L and answer bank followed by Lee. This is something I mess up a lot on. So I needed to define it as answer bank. I'm sorry, not answer bank. Answer designation or paragraph type. Well, and then the comma syntax. Again, not comma by itself. I want to make sure that that comma acts appropriately when then followed by the word I. Same thing goes for any other instances of, let's say again, your honor. This looks pretty familiar. We brought this up when we were talking about using slap strokes to help with carrying over AI data between conflicts. And again, this is appropriate syntax. So now that you're familiar with how the normal period and normal comma syntax works, same thing of course goes for like semicolon syntax, we are going to go beyond that, and I'm going to show you something that looks like this. Okay, let's bring up this example. I think this should be large enough, but you can see that we have a special syntax here, and this is called a soft comma syntax. It's going to be a squiggly bracket with a comma, and then a question mark, and then the ending squiggly bracket. Think of the question mark as asking, will I put the comma or won't I? That's all it is. This doesn't mean that the punctuation of a question mark will appear. Basically how this works is that the soft punctuation is pretty much just a soft comma or a soft semicolon. Those are just the 2 you have to worry about. Using the syntax tells Eclipse to only insert that punctuation of the comma or semicolon so long as there is nothing else that's already blocking it or occupying that space. So the reason I put this here for O is because typically someone's going to answer and say, oh, I'm not sure. And so, yeah, sure, I want the comma. But I don't always want it because maybe that's the only thing this person says before finishing his period or his sentence with the period and then moving on. So we are going to talk about, or now that we've covered how to make the syntax, which is a squiggly bracket, and then your punctuation. Again, it's going to be a comma or a semicolon, followed by a question mark, and then closing squiggly bracket. Now that we've covered how to make it, we're going to talk about the 3 different instances where you might want to consider using these soft punctuations. The first scenario where you would consider using soft commas in particular is what I call standalone words or standalone phrases. I brought up my dictionary entry for the phrase, for example, because if I'm not mistaken, people will pretty much only say, for example, as this sort of throwaway introductory sort of phrase. Thus, for example, could start a sentence, be in the middle of a sentence, or end a sentence. And instead of having to worry about my manually putting in the commas, I can use the soft comma punctuation before the word or the phrase, and then after it. And then depending on where it falls in the sentence, it will make the comma appear. Let's see it in action. I'm going to have the question start off, and he says, okay, would you give us, for example, a taste of your pie? Oops, whatever. Okay, so for example showed up in the middle of the sentence with commas on either side. That's really good. He says, what do you want, for example? And then it should end it. Hold on, if I then continue, say, hi, whatever. Okay, so this is where, for example, showed up at the end of the sentence. Because I had the smart comma, you'll notice in my notes I didn't even have to put a comma in. It was part of the definition. It inserted it before the phrase, and then it ended it with a period instead of a comma, because that's other programming that Eclipse has that whenever by default, Unless other punctuation is inserted manually by the user, the answer paragraph type will always end with a period. Had my, for example, dictionary entry not used soft commas but hard commas, you would have seen a comma here and also definitely a comma at the end of it, and it would have been a comma end period, which is just really ugly, and that's not what we want. So that's the first example of using soft commas with the use of standalone words. Another very common one that I use is, okay, you're a doctor. Is that correct? Here it is, disappearing. Oh, I have to say yes or something. Okay, perfect. I have that soft semicolon show up, and I only needed it to be defined before because it's not really often or common at all that you would have to have a semicolon after the phrase of "is that correct?" Yes. Let's see another. Is it correct that you are here now? Again, because it was a soft comma, it's not going to appear at the start of the paragraph type. That just wouldn't make sense. However, if I had to find it as a normal semicolon, unfortunately it would have appeared. So here's another example where you would want to use these soft commas. The other type of scenario where you would want to consider using soft commas for your benefit is in the situation of, I just call them conflicts. There are some phrases, throwaway words, that could be used normally in a sentence or also as a throwaway sort of phrase. I focus on the example of naturally. You could have a sentence, he says he was a naturally skilled writer, and that would just be normal, he's naturally skilled, and then someone else says, naturally, I don't want to go. And here we have this word, naturally, is defined with two different conflict choices. You can see it right down here in the corner, but just in case, I'm going to go over to my dictionary and bring it up so we can see what that looks like. All right, in the case of naturally, well, you can ignore this little part. That shows, of course, that this is a stop stroke connecting to my well, because I found that well had many definitions, had a lot of AI data as part of it. But it basically would look like this. Your first slash stroke to have the word naturally by itself, used in a sentence, and then the word is surrounded on either side with the soft commas. Let's actually look at my other example where everything draws from. My well is, again, just naked by itself, and then is surrounded by soft commas, because there are many words that people can use regularly, such as he's a well-renowned attorney, or starting a sentence, well, I'm not too sure, that would use a comma, or even something that could pop up in the middle of the sentence. So I'm not going to go into an example to show how that works, but it's going to work essentially the same as the word naturally. The last of the scenarios where you could consider using soft punctuation is something that I actually brought up a couple weeks ago, and this is referring to Rich Alassi's trick for getting even more real-time ready, and that is that you have many coordinating conjunction phrases already defined in your dictionary. A coordinating conjunction, to remind you what that means, is essentially any phrase that has a coordinating conjunction word, such as and, but, so, yet, or, nor, I suppose, and then a pronoun, typically going to be he said, I went, she wouldn't, and things like that. I don't have too many of these defined, but you could have something like, okay, so you went to the store, and she said, what then? And then she said, whatever. All right. So what you'll see here is that very quickly, when I was writing and she went, it was coming out piece by piece, but then all together, I had defined this phrase of and she said with a soft comma in front of it. Thus, again, this is only 99.9% of the time correct, but more often than not, it's going to place the soft comma or a regular comma where it should go. So there are actually many instances where this can show up, and this is an example of how dictionary building is key, and it's time consuming but absolutely well worth it. Other examples, like I said, could be but, I went, etc. The times where it may not work, just to let you know, is if the sentence might want to read John and she went to the store, which is very proper English, or John and she said they don't want to. In that case, you wouldn't want the soft punctuation. True, it's a risk when you're doing it, but I say if it's good enough for a globe-trotting reporter such as Mr. Alassi, then I think it's good enough for us. So those are the three examples of scenarios where you would want to use or could use soft commas or soft semicolons. We'll call it soft punctuation. The first is an example of these sort of standalone phrases with the example of, for example, or is that correct? The second is when you have some conflicts, such as with the word naturally. If you find other related words like this, definitely give it a try. And the last one is with the coordinating conjunction phrases, that you would want to have the comma up here, the soft comma up here, before those coordinating conjunctions of and, but, or, nor, etc. Now, before I wrap this up, there was one little bit of information and nice little tip I shared with everyone at the last class. And this is a way to further customize your Eclipse experience. We're going to take a look at the toolbar. This is totally unrelated to what we were doing earlier. It's just something nice to know. Now, this is called the toolbar, which is a collection of these really colorful little icons that are lined up here. Now, yours is probably going to look different from mine because I've customized mine, and I'm going to tell you how to do the same. All you have to do is put your cursor up here anywhere and simply right-click. It'll flash red for a little bit, and then the Customize Toolbars window pops up. Let's look at each piece and understand what it does. First, we can select the toolbar we want to modify. If you click on this, you'll see that there are up to 6 toolbars that you could have appear. I only have my first one. It's one line. But let's say I wanted to have a second one. You could click on the second toolbar, and it's important that the visible button is selected. Oof, that's an example of what it looks like. Now, it's good to know that you could add as many toolbars as you need to just by making all of these visible. I'm not going to right now. But what's cool is that when you're customizing in here, everything is happening in real time in the background, so you can see exactly what you're getting into. Going back to the first toolbar, which is what I currently have showing, the left side column is a list of all the possible shortcuts icons that are available here. I mean, it's quite a lot. They're usually pretty self-explanatory of what they are. And on the right side is what is currently here. So everything you see here is actually happening already in my toolbar. If you simply wanted to add something, that's just a matter of clicking on what you want and then pressing the Add button. And it will pop on over. Where'd it go? Oh, it went over here. But I don't want that. If you want to remove it, click what you need and then press Remove. And it takes it and it moves it over again. If you want to get more specific, you could also move items up or down. And you could have large items for easy to see. You could also have text included to remind you again, what does that icon mean? Probably the more well-versed you get with a variety of shortcuts, the less often you'll have to rely on these visuals, and you can make them smaller and more out of the way. And that's really good when you want to have more real estate. Real estate meaning it doesn't take up a lot of space, and you have more room to, let's say, expand this or this or this. There's a lot of stuff happening on the screen at any time anyway, so it would be in your best interest, I think, to get very well versed in the other shortcuts or ways to access these functions so that these don't take up so much space. So that's everything that we were covering today. We talked a lot about soft punctuation, the different scenarios that you can use them, and of course how to make them, what the syntax looks like. And then we wrapped up with a nice little overview on how you can customize your toolbars. Thank you so much, and I hope you learned something from this.